the cloud. Okay. So let me do a here. And we'll see if we are all go. And we are go.
All right, we're good to go. It is 2:00. Good afternoon and welcome to all who have tuned in on Facebook for the Hamilton Mountain Writers Guild Anthology 5 book launch. My name is Neil Chop, and I am so looking forward to hearing the 14 authors read their selections from Anthology 5. For those tuning in for the first time, Hamilton Mountain Writers Guild is a nonprofit organization supporting and promoting over 50 local authors. 100% of the profits made from the sale of our books go directly to Neighbor, a local Hamilton Mountain food center. Anthology 5 is a mix of poetry, nonfiction, and fiction. And this publication is available on Amazon.ca in ebook and paper copy. The Guild's first 4 anthologies are also available on Amazon. This launch today will take between 60 and 90 minutes to complete. And each of the 14 authors will be briefly introduced, followed by a live or pre-recorded reading of their work. How great is that? It's time to start. We're going to begin with Michael Wagstaff. Michael is going to show up on the screen for you. I want to say hello, Michael. Want to start with a thank you to Michael for creating and designing the book 5 cover. Nothing but praises for the color, the waterfall, and the overall appearance of that cover. So thank you.
Thank you.
Your book 5 story, titled Ghost of Valens Lake, is your first story published with the Guild. Tell me what exists at Valens Conservation Area that convinced you to choose this setting for your story?
Well, thanks very much, Neil, for the introduction. I wrote this story because, I really enjoy pulling pranks. I enjoy Halloween scary stories. I enjoy camping. So this story was conceived sort of as a scary campfire story. I've been camping at Valens since I was young. It's a beautiful landscape featuring many notable areas, like a very quiet wooded area. There's a boardwalk, ruins, forest paths, a marsh, rich landscape. So there was plenty to inspire me. And I tried to faithfully describe the landmarks that exist there that visitors might recognize. And so people can walk the same paths as the characters in this story and maybe, have fun scaring each other.
Excellent, excellent. Now let's listen to Michael as he reads a selection from Ghosts of Valens Lake.
The girl awoke shivering on a bed of dry leaves and looking up into the night sky. She looked past the clouds of her breath, which hung in the late autumn air. The stars came into focus, framed by a circular silhouette of treetops. She sat up with a start, confused as to why she was outdoors. Leaves clung to her long hair that fell from under her nightcap. The full moon's sharp blue light cast thick shadows among the trees. Were these the woods of her family home? The child glanced about for the stone cabin or anything else familiar. She listened for a clue within the silent forest, but one was not forthcoming. Her own forest was often eerily quiet, even during the day. To her right, she glimpsed a twinkling light in the distance, but she could not confirm the source. Could that be the light of the lantern Mother hangs by her home's doorway every night? She squinted and shifted her head left and right ever so slightly to catch a clear view through the obscuring trees. How did I get out here? The child wondered. Is this a dream? A growling sound from behind made her hold her breath. Eyes wide, she turned her head slowly to find the shape of a canine within the brush in the bright moonlight. Coyotes don't attack people, she told herself, grasping at reassurance. The wild dog had crept up close to her while she was asleep, and she was emboldened by his hunger and that of the family of 6 but nearby. He was committed to finding food this night. His lips were curled back, baring his teeth, and the gravelly growl in his gullet matched the growling of his empty belly. The child rose to her feet slowly, eyes locked with the dog's. She'd been taught to make loud noises when walking in the woods to alert and scare off nearby cats, coyotes, and bears. She opened her mouth to shout, but could not make a sound. Terror and the frigid cold had dried all the moisture in her throat. In a panic, she whirled and ran, sprinting for the tiny light. The dog plunged forward through the brush and was quickly joined by his family. They took up a chorus of excited barks and yelps. Once the frenzy had started, it swept through the pack in an overpowering wave. The crazed dogs raced with vigor and desperation, each whipped into madness by the imminent feast and fighting to be the first to reach this prey. Without a wisp of wind to disturb the air, the child's breath was suspended in space as she fled through the dark forest. The pack of dogs ripped through the delicate breath clouds as they chased the child down the long, straight forest path. She reached an area of the forest where the leaves gave way to a carpet of long, thin pine needles covering every inch of the frozen ground. Her bare feet stung horribly. Her ragged inhalations drew little from the brittle air, and her lungs ached from oxygen deprivation. The exertion and cold brought forth tears, and ice formed at the corners of her eyes. As the dogs closed in, they left droplets of steaming saliva among the pine needles and on the faces of the pack members behind them.
Now that's what I call a fine job, Michael. Thank you so much for reading that. And if folks are interested in reading more of Michael's story, get out there and buy a book on Amazon.ca. Our next reader is going to be Karen Wood. Good afternoon, Karen.
Hello, Neil.
Karen, your bio tells us that you enjoy sharing stories that were told in your family when you were growing up, and that now you're adding your own stories to your family's, for your family's future generations. Tell the listeners, Karen, what strategies or techniques that you employ to keep your memoirs as accurate or true to the past as possible.
Well, Neil, to be authentic, you need details. And I hear the story, and then I will write out a storyline or an outline, and then I start some research. And I will research census or enumerations, births, land records, whatever is necessary to bring authenticity to my story. Then there's also historical societies and archives that I can visit. And probably the most important thing is social history, so that you can tell the people what kind of clothes they were wearing or how they traveled. Those kinds of things help the reader visualize what's happening. In this story, it's more modern, and it's about our family moving to Hamilton, and it's from a woman's perspective and how I had to deal with getting people in the office and settling the children into school. and working at the home, and then finding my own niche in the community. And there's a lot of alone time and a lot of soul searching that goes on. And I thought maybe sharing would help others too.
Well, thank you, Karen. Let's listen to Karen now as she reads from her Anthology 5 memoir, A Place to Call Home.
The children had left for school. They were happy as they jostled out the door. This was the time she normally planned her day. But this morning she gave a long sigh as she sat down with her coffee. It had grown cold. A puddle of milk was carelessly smeared beside an empty bowl, a lone Cheerio exposed like her raw nerves. Her imagination ran wild as she anticipated all the challenges that lay ahead. Was her resolve to support her husband in his career enough? But at what cost? She knew they were all involved in too many activities. Farewells would be difficult for everyone. The only upside of moving was rest and reprieve from a too busy schedule. Hamilton, the city of steel, smog, and crime. How does one make a home in such a place? The world weighed heavy with fear and change and of the unknown. One day following their move, her husband came home with a coupon book that was popular at the time. There were discounts for diners, dinners, and outlet malls. She loved shopping. He said, by the time you work your way to the end, you'll be familiar with Hamilton. That may have been, but she wasn't prepared for all the one-way streets and mountain accesses. Some did switchbacks, some landed you at the far end of the city. During rush hour downtown, she got caught in traffic as she circled the block on one-way streets, unable to change lanes to pick up her husband. He spotted her on the second pass and managed to cross the street when she came by again. Whew! She felt like Wonder Woman fighting the odds, wondering what challenge she'd face next. She even ventured to nearby Stony Creek, where she found Len's Mills on Broccoli Drive off Barton Street East. She found yarn, lots of yarn at a discount. What a find. She loved to crochet Afghans for cuddling on TV nights. As time passed, she settled in and kept busy sewing, gardening, and looking after her family. Her neighbor invited her for tea. Being a fellow nurse, they quickly became friends, attending classes together, making Christmas wreaths with cones and nuts. After learning about Hamilton Place, she resolved that this would be a family Christmas outing. Each year would be a different show, such as the Nutcracker or the famous People Players. Hamilton had so much to offer that she forgot her fears of the mafia. She no longer worried about the motorcycle gang who lived across the road. They were always on their best behavior at home to avoid attracting attention. Her adventure-loving husband was proving efficient at presenting challenges for growth. There was a contract in Trinidad for telephone employees and their families. Her husband wanted to go. No, it had only been 3 years. Hamilton was just beginning to feel like home. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you, Karen. You did very well with that. Thank you for reading this afternoon. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you telling the listeners and viewers some of those techniques that you used for your memoirs.
Thank you.
On to Christine Carlton, our next author, presenting.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Neil, for having me here.
You're welcome, Christine. Right now, Christine, oh, there you are. I was going to say I needed to see your video, but you got it. Christine enjoys writing nonfiction and fiction. In your most recent work, the City of Champions, you write about a memory of your sister. What compelled you to tell this particular story of your sister and the bowling championship?
This was a very, very important time for the Hamilton YBC and for my sister in particular. Involved in the YBC, and I don't remember ever having a Saturday morning when I wasn't bowling as I was growing up. My sister was more shy and was absolutely thrilled that she was selected to be on this team, and it truly was one of the highlights of her growing up. And I wanted to share that the city was more than just steel and nursing, Master University. We were a family of all sorts, and that's what this team came to mean to me and my sister.
All right. Let's listen as Christine reads a portion of her story, City of Champions.
A loud cry rose up from the far lane as Larry watched Carol make a spare. He added her name to the list. All right, ladies, gather round. I've made my decision. Larry struggled to be heard. A tall man, he still needed to stand on a bench to get everyone's attention. He called the girls over again, and a small crowd encircled him. Teen girls of all shapes and sizes clamored for a good position. They didn't want to miss out on the selection. These are the girls to make the team. It wasn't an easy decision. You are all very talented. I've watched all of you over the past few weeks. I expect every one of you to support them as we have a lot of work to do. In no special order, Colleen, Carol, Josie, Jane, and Brenda. I want the 5 of you to stay today. We'll go over all the details of the practice schedule. Anyone not able to commit? The bowling alley had been silent as Larry made his announcement, and then a loud cheer went up as each girl stood on the bench next to Larry when they were introduced. Colleen was a sure selection. She was a solid striker. Carol just proved she could create a spare under pressure, and Josie, Jane, and Brenda were strong team captains and had been in the YBC for years. True to his word, Coach Larry worked the girls hard. He kept them practicing daily, and he arranged for the pin boys to set up difficult shots so they could master the skills needed. Teenage girls can be difficult, but Coach Larry was an easy man to like, and he kept them focused. He knew about the smoking behind the lanes and hanging out with boys, but he was able to redirect their energy. Immersing their bodies and minds into the game, he kept them working on difficult spares the pin boys created. They practiced sparing splits and scoring strikes and learned how to use the markers on the lanes to avoid punching the head pin. This was 5-pin bowling at its best. Members of the YBC, the girls were a strong team. All their hard work paid off. They won the city championship and progressed to the provincials. A first for the small bowling alley known as Mountain Lanes that was hidden away near the corners of Upper Wentworth and Concession Street. Preparing for the challenge of provincials ahead of them, the girls were excited and talked about becoming more cohesive as a team. With support from their parents, they agreed to make a team uniform consisting of a bowling skirt, a bit short as minis were the style of the day, to match their team shirts. The red and black plaid mini became their signature outfit and complemented with their matching uniforms were an intimidating force. Sherwood Lanes, now closed, was a hive of activity the day of the provincials. The host city, Hamilton, welcomed teams from all over Ontario to fight for the right to represent the province at the nationals. But none were a match for the girls from Sam Shaw's Lanes. The girls met in the parking lot and entered the lanes together, hoping to intimidate some of the weaker teams. Wearing their uniform, Brenda left them to go throw up in the bathroom, but came back shaking and smiling. Larry pulled them into a huddle and helped them get their confidence back. Their plaid skirts and winning red shirts made them feel like professionals as they approached their designated lanes. staring down the girls from the other cities. Many supporters from mountain lanes were cheering them on. Carol's mother had made black sport towels for them, embroidering their initials on them, and created rhymes of encouragement for each girl. At the end of the day, when the tallying was done, the senior girls team advanced to the nationals in Vancouver. Sam Shaw was proud of his young ladies and all the hard work they had done. He started fundraising for the trip, selling chocolate commons and Christmas cakes. They were just shy of the amount needed when Sam Shaw stepped up and covered the difference. They were his girls after all, surrounded by parents and loved ones. Thank you for listening.
Terrific. Thank you, Christine. And if Christine has piqued your interest to see how her sister's team fares, her sister and the team fares at the national championships, get over to Amazon.ca and buy an Anthology 5 and read the rest of Christine's story. We are going to hear from Michael Williams, our next author. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Neil. Thank you.
You're welcome. Michael is a storyteller and a memoir writer. His latest piece in book 5 is titled Boom Chink, Boom Chink. What is it about this particular excerpt that you've chosen that you thought would be important enough for us to hear?
Well, Neil, first off, the story is ultimately really a tribute to my grandfather. You'll hear a bit more about him in a moment. And the excerpt kind of sets the scene, which leads into the story of another fine mess that I got myself into. So I want to just begin by getting you to imagine a packed nightclub. That's where this story begins. It's standing room only. The audience is anticipating a great night of Dixieland jazz music. And the band leader suddenly turns and nods at me, and it's a 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, and he raises his trumpet and he blows the opening bars to When the Saints Go Marching In. Beside me, Eddie, the bass player, is thumping out the rhythm on the bass, and I'm perched there at the drum kit, drumsticks in hand, my heart pounding. The music begins to swell, and my body screams, "Stop! I can't do this. I don't know how to play the drums." This is no nightmare in which you kind of wake up and saved from humiliation. No. For a half hour earlier, my friend Ken and I had come into this club to enjoy a night of hot Dixieland jazz. We sit down at the last available table, order a couple of beers, and we're chatting away, waiting for the band to begin, when an older gentleman stops by the table, and he recognizes my friend Ken as a fellow musician. And then Ken introduces me to this older man, whose name is Eddie, and he's the bass player in the band. And Ken goes on to explain that I am the grandson of the late, great Ron Wicken of Hamilton. And my grandfather, there he is behind me there, he was a well-known band leader during the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. Well, Eddie's face lights up at the news, and he shakes my hand. He says, you know, he said, your grandfather was a great man. He was a good drummer. He was a good band leader. And you know, he gave me my first job. I've never forgotten his kindness. Well, as to say, Eddie and I shake hands, and Eddie has to go back to get ready to play. And as he does, I start recollecting those childhood days when we used to go out to visit my grandparents out at their home in Waterdown. And I'd be in the basement listening to my granddad play his Dixieland records, and he'd introduce me to those great names like Louis Armstrong and Jimmy Dorsey and Duke Ellington and many, many, many others. And I recall too the Friday and Saturday nights when our parents, too poor to hire a babysitter for myself and my 3 younger brothers, they would take us to the dances, places like Prudham's, the Brant Inn, and the Royal Connaught Hotel. And hundreds would gather there to dance to the Ron Wicken Orchestra. And while my brothers and I scurried around, explored all the nooks and crannies of these inns and hotels, thousands more would be listening to my granddad's orchestra on Hamilton's radio station, CHML. Well, suddenly, my recollections are interrupted. Eddie, the bass player, has reappeared at my table. And he says to me, he says, I've talked to the boys in the band, and they would be honored if you'd come and sit in and play with us. And he grabs me by the arm and he pulls me up from my chair and he's dragging me up to the bandstand. Well, I try to explain to Eddie that I don't play drums, but he just kind of dismisses my, with a wave of his hand. He says, no, he says, the boys, we said, we would really be honored to have the grandson of Ron Wicken play drums with us. Well, what am I going to do? Already I'm up at the stage. The lights have dimmed. The audience is really expecting. I hear my name and my grandfather's name in the same sentence. The band leader's introducing me to the audience, and now they're all applauding for me. And the drummer is handing me his drumsticks. And I can see in his eyes, how honored he's feeling having me sit in and play his drums, not knowing that I don't have a clue how to play drums. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why didn't I just run away? I mean, I was thinking about it, but at the same time, I thought, how humiliating would that look? If I just ran, I mean, I couldn't run back to my chair. I'd have to run right out of the club. I'd have to leave town. Anyway, I didn't know what else to do except to sit down behind the drum kit, pick up the sticks. And I am thinking to myself, oh my goodness, what will I do? And while I'm thinking, the band leader, Tommy, the trumpet player, turns around, 1, a 2. He says, by the way, he said, we're doing When the Saints Go Marching In. Oh my gosh. I can see everybody looking at me, the audience, the band, the expectations. And all I could think was, Grandpa, please help me. I need you. I'll leave it there, Neil.
Oh, that's quite a cliffhanger for us today, Michael. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I like the way you uniquely presented that selection, and you presented it like a storytelling feature. So good for you.
Thank you. No, I think I'm a storyteller probably first, and then I just try to write the stories down. So, thanks very much. I really appreciated having the chance to share it.
Excellent. Thank you. And our next reader will be Laura Lane. Hello, Laura. Laura, the Hamilton Mountain Writers Guild authors are so much more than just writers. Like you have a website. You have been interviewed for many publications. You've completed podcast experiences. And you're the author of 4 outstanding published works. Briefly share with the folks today about your website offer that you call Book Laura.
Thanks, Neil. Yes, so because I have an opportunity to work with cancer moms. I'm a cancer coach, a courage coach. I specialize in providing loving, faith-based support to moms whose kids are fighting for their lives. And any opportunity that I have to speak on a stage, to come and speak on a podcast, that's what I'm asking people if they'd like to. If I have the opportunity, I would love to share with them the things that I teach, the coaching experience that I have, and that's what I do.
All right, here's your opportunity to kind of plug your website, because I didn't tell people your website address. Go ahead.
So it's lauralane.ca, nice and simple, Canadian, and just after me. So lauralane.ca. Come and visit. There are, my blog posts are transcripts from our podcasts. All the incredible people I've had an opportunity to interview myself, as well as links to the podcasts that I've had an opportunity to be on as well.
All right, good. Please listen now to Laura's powerful poem, His Name Was Steve.
His name was Steve. Small of stature, long dark hair, friend of a friend, a little forlorn look in his eyes, a sadness that penetrates the soul. I drove by that familiar Hamilton street. He was standing there against the wall. He peered into the cart. I waved. Climb inside. Where do you want to go? Do you need a ride? I knew that street, that corner, standing against the wall. I knew those boys weren't peering into cars looking for me. They were peering into cars looking for. But this friend of a friend, why him? Why there? Do you have a place to stay tonight? No? That's terrible. Working the streets, no place to go. Are you hungry? Have you eaten? No, that's terrible. Working the streets, no place to go. I have a little food I'll share with you, and a couch and a blanket. Stay with me tonight. But where is he now? His name was Steve. I look for him on that corner now. Where did he go? His name was Steve. Don't tell me things happen. No, that's terrible. Working the streets, no place to go.
Thank you, Laura. That was first-class work for you, and thanks for sharing that very heartfelt piece today.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Terry Martins. And before Terry picks up here, I want to let everyone know that we are about 1/3 of the way through our authors. So we have about 9 more authors to present. Sorry, Terry. Terry has an interest in a variety of genres, including true crime. In 1976, the folks of Hamilton and Greater Southern Ontario were shocked as news reports emerged about the 3 members of the Rollo family murdered, and 2 of the bodies were dumped into various waterways in the Niagara Peninsula. Terry, what inspired you to retell this true crime story for the Guild's Anthology 5?
Well, it's something I've always remembered. I remember it at the time it happened, and I was very entranced and captivated by it. When I first came out of college, I worked for as a legal assistant, and I worked for Dennis Roy, who was also involved in the case. So it actually got me more interested again, and I've read all the newspaper reports I can find, and I recently reached out to get some copies of transcripts and police reports. So it's just something I've always been fascinated with, and that's why I wanted to share it.
All right, let's listen now as Terry reads a selection of her story titled Shattered Dreams, The Rollo Murders.
I grew up in the Steel City, so labeled because of the large number of steel mills along the edge of the Hamilton Harbor. Times have changed, steel mills have closed, and is now known as the City of Waterfalls. In the Golden Horseshoe region of central Ontario, Hamilton has been a friendly place to raise a family. There is a genuine sense of community throughout the city, whether above or below the mountain, where families would get together for celebrations, barbecues, fireworks, or house parties. This was the case in 1976 on Lantana Court, a small cul-de-sac in Hamilton's West Mountain. Growing up in Hamilton, this case has always stuck out in my mind. I remember hearing about it at the time it occurred, and I'm still fascinated by it to this date. Over the many years that have followed, I have read numerous newspaper accounts, spoken with Dennis Roy and others who have had a connection to the case, or John Rollo as he grew up. Individual perceptions of the type of man John was vary greatly. On August 16, 1976, John and Sandra Rollo visited Sandra's parents, Doug and Margaret Hollington, at their home in Cambridge, Ontario. The visit was like any other visit to the grandparents, with fun, laughter, and splashing in the backyard, celebrating when their grandson Jason and his determination to learn to dive. The family ate dinner together before the Rollos headed back to Hamilton for Sandra's 8 p.m. piano lessons with a neighbor. The neighborhood was a friendly one. Families often spent time together in the peacefulness of their surroundings. On the evening of August 16th, 1976, Sandra Rollo was outside discussing music lessons for herself and her husband John while their children, Stephanie and Jason, ran outside in their pajamas. The sounds of laughter, children's voices, and the occasionally passing car filled the air. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Sandra sat in her living room talking to one of her neighbors until 11 p.m. This was not unusual, as the Rallos were known for their hospitality. However, the events would follow that later that night would shatter the peacefulness. It was during the late evening and early morning hours of August 16th and 17th, 1976, that John Rallo would brutally murder his wife and 2 children inside their family home. John Rallo was a 33-year-old office manager at Hamilton City Hall Engineering Department and the Secretary of Traffic and Engineering Committee. John was born to Jack and Dorothea Rallo. An only child, John spent much of his younger years in the city's North End until his family moved to the mountain. Growing up, John was known as a quiet guy who spent much of his time hanging out on the street and watching girls. This continued in his adult life on his lunch hour when he worked at City Hall and would spend many lunch hours women watching at the corner of King and James Streets in Hamilton. Not far from there was Diamond Jim's Tavern, an establishment that John would frequently visit, and according to John, it was the best strip show in town. Many people who knew John described him as a great guy, one of the boys, and a go-getter with a super sense of humor. Equally, as many knew him as an arrogant and self-centered man who never grew up. Neighbors often referred to him as a hearts and flowers kind of guy, sweet and sentimental man. Later, it would come to light that John was involved in more than one extramarital affair and had a private stash of bondage magazines illegal in Canada. These magazines would play a prominent role in the trial as they contained information on the elaborate knots, the same knots used in tying up Sandra. Sandra grew up in Hamilton, one of 3 children born to Doug and Margaret Pollington. She was raised in a loving house, Catholic, with her brother David and his sister Janice. The Pollingtons were a close family. Doug and Margaret spent much of their time together, enjoying both their children and grandchildren. At the time of her death, Sandra was working as a title searcher at the Hamilton Registry Office in the Ellen Bearcoat Building in downtown Hamilton. She was a friendly, cheerful woman dedicated to her family and friends. Neighbors thought of her as more friendly and outgoing of the 2. Sandra's parents did not like the age difference between the 2. However, despite this, John and Sandra were married on October 6, 1966, at St. Enoch's Church on Main Street East in Hamilton. They lived in an apartment building along Concession Street on Hamilton Mountain after their wedding. They would later move to a home on Dundurn Street prior to the birth of their son, Jason, in 1970, and Stephanie in 1971, a son and daughter commonly known as a millionaire's family. In 1972, the Rallos moved to what would be the family's final home. It appeared to most that they had a happy, fulfilling marriage. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Fantastic, Terry. Thank you for sharing your true crime selection for the launch today. I remember myself being 18 years old and on a way to a job in St. Catharines in that time period in August of 1976. And I recall the police doing the searches in the waterways along the canals of Lake Ontario there. So it was a really challenging time for a lot of people in Hamilton and the neighboring areas to try and get a grips that could someone really do this to their family. So again, thank you for sharing your selection. And we're going to move on to Linda Liu.
Hello.
Hello, Linda.
Hi.
Linda, your work in book 5, titled Marooned, is about a character named Joshua reading his journal from 10 years past. Tell the folks joining us today what you meant in your story when the main character Joshua says, "I felt awakened from a long sleep."
Well, I'm glad to be able to read an excerpt today. This is a setting of in COVID in Hamilton back in the spring of 2020. And it's all about the sense of the other. So Joshua is a young teenage boy, and sometimes it just takes that one person in your life to really change you. And that bridge can be achieved because when you see others, you see them as different, you keep your distance, and that really stifles a lot of people. So they really don't bloom and flourish. So I think even though it could be awkward, it's a good lesson to allow even that one person to help you build bridges in life. So that's what it's about. So I'll just read a couple of paragraphs. Gran, Mildred Johns, was my grandmother by marriage. Her husband was my dad's dad. Gramps was a nice but quiet man, and I remember my dad just sitting with him, but not talking much. Dad said that was the stoic Scots way. My mom, who was of Irish background with coppery curly hair, would then snort and stiffen her back. I inherited her hair and was self-conscious of my untamed mop. My parents were not close to Gran, even when Gramps was alive. Although we lived in the same city, we rarely saw Gran. Naively, I always thought it was because we were not blood relatives. There had been spotty visits, preceded by Dad saying, I guess we should check in. That was code for I'd feel guilty if she fell or something. These were brief, awkward, and polite visits. I always wandered to the large backyard, which was interesting, and avoided any talking, only mumbling, thanks, Gran, when she pressed some bills into my hand. Spring moved into summer. Gran and I fell into a routine of early rising and working around the house and garden. We spent our evenings watching the news, then we had an hour of quiet reading. Gran had wanted company and simply passed me a couple of books from her well-stocked shelf, saying, I'm so happy you're here to sit with me. Holding a book in front of me and turning pages were a novelty. I realized books had a smell of their own. Thank you.
Sensational. Thank you, Linda, for reading Maroon. And I hope people are encouraged by our story to buy a copy of the Anthology 5 and finish reading What Happens to Joshua and His Gran. Our next author is James Ruth. Hi, James.
James, you're on mute. You've got to unmute, sir.
Okay, there we are.
There you go, James.
Thank you.
James
for
has
having me.
written, sorry?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. James has written for and performed in local Hamilton theater, and he enjoys writing suspense mysteries and has stories in Guild's book 1, 2, 3, and 5. James, explain the connection between this piece from book 5 titled Macy and Mandy and the previous work Panda Girl that you had published with the Guild.
Well, the three key people in both of those books are a 9 and 11-year-old girl named Katie, her Aunt Whitney, and the Panda Girl doll that she loves so much. And this is what the Panda Girl looks like. And it's all about a special gift that comes to only one person within each generation of their family. And she got this gift when she was diving into her pool on her 9th birthday, and she waved her hand and everything froze. So she stopped time. And that's when it was found out that she was actually the next generation girl to get this gift.
All right. Let's pay attention now as Jim reads a selection from Macy and Mandy.
11-year-old Katie cried many times in the afternoon, watching the movers dismantle her bedroom and cram it into their truck. 2 hours later, they finished delivering and unloading everything into their new family home on Hamilton Mountain. She never let go of the bag containing her 2 most important possessions, her stuffed panda doll and the panda ears headband that she wore to bed every night. When the movers finally left, Katie ran up the stairs to see her new bedroom. Through her window, there was a pleasant view over the escarpment to the city below, but everything felt so empty. The bed only had her mattress and pillow on it, and the walls were bare. But she believed she could turn this into her new favorite hideout. She took a deep breath and said, "I can handle this." Holding her stuffed panda, she placed the headband on her head, sat on the bed, closed her eyes, and said, "Mandy." When she opened her eyes and looked around, her mouth dropped open, her head sagged, and tears flowed. She flopped back on her pillow, then felt someone touch her shoulder. She looked up and saw her Aunt Whitney kneeling on the floor beside her bed. Katie was breathing fast. "Mandy doesn't work." Whitney smiled. "Trust me, Mandy is fine. I just want my old bedroom back." Whitney gently held Katie's hand. "You knew that when Mandy took you out on an exciting adventure, you never actually left your bedroom. And no matter how long you were gone, when you came back, the time was always the same as when you left. Nobody ever knew you were gone. We rode giraffes in Africa. We climbed snowy mountains. I can't throw that away. The headband I gave you 2 years ago was the safest and easiest way for you to start. You can still do anything you want, but starting today, you no longer need to wear the headband or be in the bedroom." Whitney leaned in, making serious eye contact. "Is it time for you to embrace the next level of the incredible gift you inherited from our family? Are you ready?" Katie jumped off the bed. "Yes, I am." "Okay, toss the headband back on the bed, hold my hand, and close your eyes." When Katie opened her eyes, she expected to see her live panda, Mandy. This time, however, it was different. She looked at Whitney, and then at the sunset that was just starting. Are we in my backyard? How did we get here, and where's Mandy?" "Trust me, everything is fine." Katie frowned. "I will miss Mandy." "Mandy will be with you soon." Whitney placed her hand on Whitney's lower back. "Listen carefully. Wave your hands like you're washing a window. Close your eyes and say, 'freeze.'" Katie did it perfectly, and Whitney pointed. "See the blue jay that was flying across the backyard?" Katie looked up. "Oh my God, it stopped in midair." Rule number 1, if you need to fix something, you freeze time, focus on your target, point, and say, "back." Then move your hands to where you want it to go. Time will gradually reverse, and you will stop pointing. Try it with the bird. Katie pointed and did everything right, carefully moving her hand. The bird did not turn and fly back to the branch. He exactly reversed his original flight pattern. Katie started doing her happy dance. "That's awesome! Does that bird have any idea what happened?" The bird is now sitting frozen on a branch back in time, like nothing happened. If you want to restart the bird from there, you say, "start." Katie did that, and the bird flew back, then stopped where it was first frozen. Why did it stop? Because you took him back to the original freeze time I created when I brought us here. Katie thought for a moment. "So if I close my eyes, wave my hands, and say freeze, I can stop time and go back, but I can only return to the present?" "Yes, remember that I was holding your hand and brought you with me when we first came down from the bedroom. So rule number 2, you must be careful, because if you're touching anyone when you freeze time, they will automatically be included in your activity." "So if I want to talk to Mandy anytime, anywhere, I just wave my hand, go freeze time, then say Mandy 3 times? "Yes. And when I'm done, I say goodbye and no one will ever know I did it?" "You got it." "Okay, but how did we get down here?" "Good question. Just like before, once in freeze time, you can get Mandy to take you anywhere you want." Whitney touched Katie's shoulder and said, "Goodbye," and they were instantly standing back beside the bed. Whitney removed her hand from Katie's. Now it's your turn. Katie did everything right, and when she opened her eyes, Mandy was standing on the bed facing her. It's about time you talked to me, girl. That's it.
Nice going, Jim. Wouldn't we all like to have the power to freeze time once in a while? And thank you for joining in the book launch today and for reading your selection.
Thank you.
Our next author is Marianne Mason.
Hi.
Marianne has published stories in Guild's book 3 and 5. Marianne, please tell the viewers the backstory that provided the impetus for your book 5 story titled Snow Angel.
Yeah, so this story is a fictionalized account of something happened to me in real life where my car broke down in the middle of a snowstorm after I had attended this terrible office Christmas party. And I ended up waiting for over an hour in the snow and in the cold for a bus that probably wasn't coming. And this kind lady saw me there and she stopped and, gave me a lift to the nearest mall where I was able to, catch a cab down to the train station to make my way home. So that this story is based on that feeling that she was my guardian angel that night. That was the inspiration.
All right, Marianne, please read to the listeners and viewers your chosen selection from the story Snow Angel.
It was the imperfect end of the worst office Christmas party ever. I peered out into a swirling whiteness illuminated by my car's headlights, trying to make out tracks a previous vehicle had made on the snowy road. With a vice-like grip on the steering wheel, I feathered the gas pedal as I attempted to maintain traction. The headlights flickered and the engine coughed weakly and died. I used the vehicle's remaining momentum to ease over to the side of the street, ending in a snowbank. Not again. I really need a new car. Stifling a curse, I pulled my cell phone out of my purse to call for a tow truck and push the power button. No response. The screen remained stubbornly blank and my heart sank as I realized the battery was dead. Now what do I do? It was hard to see beyond the snow into the darkness, but the lack of lights indicated that I had stopped along a section of road devoid of human habitation. As I waited anxiously, the road remained empty. Minute after minute ticked by as I sensed more than saw the swirling darkness with no welcome headlights, and I realized that no help was coming. I was on my own. I took stock of what I had that might be useful. After fumbling through my purse, I found a small flashlight and a granola bar. Stuffed under the back seat was a wool hat, which I happily put on. I looked out the window and tried to visualize my surroundings in my mind's eye, wishing I had a map. I wasn't certain where I was because of the unending landscape of snow-covered trees, but I thought there was a GO train station somewhere to the southwest. All I had to do was find the station and I could catch the train home to Hamilton. My decision made, I pulled my purse strap over my head crossbody style to secure it and put on my gloves. I winced as I stepped out onto the snowy road. My short dress boots were okay for walking, but they still had heels, and the thin leather did not keep out the cold. At least I had worn dress pants. Shining the small flashlight around me, I realized it was useless and stashed it in my purse. Locking the car, I ventured down the road, trying to get my bearings. As I rounded a bend, the trees that lined the road gave way to open fields, and the wind picked up. I turned slowly, trying to determine where I was. Clustered across sections of open fields were several rows of trees, mounds of soft pillows on a bed of snow that were barely visible in the ambient light. I wondered if there was a golf course in the area. I looked downhill across one of the fields, realizing that there was a large, dark shape visible at the far end. Could that be the train station? I considered the trek across the open snow-covered fields during a blizzard and wondered how I would find my way. If I used the slope of the hill as my guide, I shouldn't have to worry about getting turned around in the dark. I went out into the night with the wind howling and spitting snow in my face, with a single thought repeating in my mind. How did I get here? Now I'll just pause there.
Okay. Quite often, Writers are inspired by real life experiences like you were to write the story Snow Angel. Great reading, Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next reader is going to be Teresa Karlinski. Before she picks up her story and reads, I want to let all the viewers and listeners know that there are 5 authors remaining in our book launch this afternoon.
Oh, she is.
And there's Teresa. Thank you, Teresa. Want to thank you for coordinating and managing the proofreaders of Anthology 5. You and your team definitely raised the bar for the integrity and consistency of this book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you too, for you and your team. Your book 5 story titled Chit Chat with a Cat is a unique piece where you utilize a connection between a cat and its owner. Sylvia is the character, and Sylvia tells Hemingway the cat a story about a family's grapple with their aging parent. What is the story's message that you want to share with the readers?
I think that no one is immune from what life has in store, no matter how we choose to live our lives.
Okay. Let's listen now as Teresa shares a selection from Chit Chat with a Cat.
If Sylvia had learned anything during her life, it was change never stopped. It began the day you were born and continued throughout your life. The world changed, people changed, and she changed. What choice did anyone have? What choice had she? An introspective woman, Sylvia appeared a smidgen plump for her stature. 67, a divorced retiree, she sported a full head of short hair, the color of thick cotton clouds on a windy summer day. She shared her home with Hemingway, the cat, not the author. Her orange cat often hung over her shoulder, too lazy to follow her around the house. I recognized right away we would enjoy a great friendship. Sylvia's smile widened, ad-worthy, porcelain veneers on display. Her eyes welled as she and the cat gazed at one another. Yes, even in the animal shelter, you took to me too. The cat straddled the top of the lounge chair behind Sylvia's ample shoulder, a whisker's width from her ear. Hemingway blinked, scrutinizing Sylvia, spellbound by every word. They studied one another a moment. Her eyes crossed and she burst into giggles. Sylvia shifted lower into her lazy boy. We're blessed, Hem. The news fluttered across the television screen with the sound muffled. She switched it on for company, not the news. The flicker of the gas fireplace lured her attention. Her face lit up with an idea. She finger probed the table's surface for her notebook. Not there. Already she'd forgotten what she wanted to write. Hemingway cast his focus to her empty lap and slipped down with feline elegance, taking ownership of his favorite snooze zone. Sylvia caressed his soft fur with a thoughtful hand. You want to hear how unlucky some people are? Well, do you? She poked his shoulder. He twitched off the finger. I remember a young couple, Jack and Ruby Cooper, who invited the wife's mother to live with them following her husband's death. What a brouhaha that turned out to be. The woman smoked like an incinerator. Within a week, her son-in-law wanted to incinerate her. I met Lizzie, Ruby's mother, at the dental office where we worked for years. The couple spent money they couldn't afford to add an extension to their house to accommodate Lizzie. Jack had known she smoked when he met her, but that had been years before Ruby's father died. Since she had become a widow, bored and without focus, she blew more smoke than a Hamilton steel mill smokestack, lighting a fresh cigarette from the last. Hemingway, unruffled by the tale, drew back to study his owner with luminous, steadfast eyes. Sylvia caressed his fluffy head. Brow puckered, she squinted into a distance beyond and shook off an inner shudder. I like our life, Cat. I'm never lonely, never need to depend on anyone, dissimilar to other people my age. Ruby's mother, for example. Listen to me, getting sappy. The cat heaved a deep sigh, his eyes closed. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I like the way your segues that you had between Sylvia and Hemingway and the story, you did them with such clarity. So tremendous work. Thank you. And thanks for joining us during this book launch today.
Thanks so much.
Our next author will be Anita Holdersma.
Hello.
Hello, Anita.
Hi.
There you are. Characteristically, Anita, your writing is nonfiction and you write what you experience. And you have written a piece in volumes 1, 2, and 3 of the Guild publications. Anita, how is your recent work in volume 5 titled Daydreaming? How is that different from your previous street walker memoirs?
Well, Neil, I am not a natural fiction writer. I'm impressed by people, especially those in the Guild I've got a chance to meet, who could keep characters and plots and whole worlds in their heads. I could never do that. I write real life, although I do sometimes exaggerate. But for book 1, I wrote about my mother and her interest in moose mating rituals. And number 2, I wrote about the stories that you tell when the family gathers time and time again. And in book number 3, I introduced people to my walking project. And I have a taped piece that will let us have the excerpt. So Sarah's going to roll the tape.
I'm going to try to roll this tape. Everyone hold tight for one momento. Let me remove spotlights here. And we're going to go share screen and share with sound as somebody has told me to do. And here we go, share. And big screen. And
my name is Anita Joldersma. My contribution to book 5 is Confessions of a Street Walker, Daydreaming. It's possible that you've seen a rather peculiar woman walking around the streets of Hamilton, Ontario over the last 6 years. If you have, I hope you gave a wave, because I am she. I confess that I started out as a reluctant walker, but then made a promise to myself to walk every street in my city. It began in the fall of 2014, and 4 years later, I finished trotting upon all of the walkable streets in Hamilton. My project consists of walking on streets and roads and then marking them off on my map. I confess that all this perambulating has become much more than just walking. I fell in love with Hamilton. It's home, and I enjoy walking through every nook and cranny. I feel like an urban explorer finding undiscovered countries. I've been writing about some of my walking adventures on my blog, and I always keep my eyes open for something exciting to share. Once I finished Hamilton, I continued wandering. My map borders expanded east and then south, and now we're heading west. I completed all of the streets of Stony Creek and then Glanbrook, and I recently finished Ancaster and Dundas. So it's on to Flamborough, which, by the way, is huge. Every time I set out, I wonder what I will stumble upon when I walk the routes that connect us to each other. I always walk alone, but confess it might be fun to take you along with me. Sometimes I catch myself daydreaming when I walk, thinking up great things to write about. I'm pretty sure my imagination is more exciting than the actual walking I do. Come with me while I walk. Walking, the final frontier. These are the confessions of a street walker, Anita. Her continuing mission to explore strange new roads, to seek out new streets and walk past habitations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Well, that's not quite true. Lots of people have been there before, but not everyone has walked every street, and that's my mission. Engage the engines ahead warp factor 1. I let my mind wander as my feet do the same. And I go on to write little stories, little vignettes about some of my imagined adventures using different genres. I tried a fairy tale and something Jane Austen-ish. I tried a detective and a Western, and I tried Dr. Seuss. And if that's not enough, I threw in a zombie. If you ever get a chance to read my story or my blog, I hope it gives you a sense of the wonderful walking adventure that I'm on. And if you see me out there walking, give a wave.
Give a wave. Super. Thank you, Anita, for reading. And also want to thank Anita for all the work that Anita did in preparing those many forms that we, the authors, had to complete to enter our work into Anthology 5. She was the creator and sender-outer. And Anita always likes those unique words. She was the sender-outer of all of those forms. And thank you again for reading. Our next author is Margaret March. Hello, Margaret.
Hello.
Margaret enjoys fiction stories involving relationships, what she calls the boomer romance. Margaret, explain the term boomer romance for us.
Boomer romances are about relationships within the over 50 age group, the boomers. They involve their own unique set of issues different from the younger crowd.
Margaret, how do you think your book 5 selection, Tea Leaves, how do you think it fits the category of boomer romance?
In Tea Leaves, we have two mature, unattached adults who meet when Livia decides to hire a handyman, Nick, but his personality seems to aggravate her.
All right, let's listen now as Margaret reads her Tea Leaves.
With the radio on, Livia scrubbed the stovetop, humming to the music, while Nick attached quarter round to the baseboard in the dining room. He hollered, "What's all that racket?" "The radio. How can you hear anything over all the noise you're making with that nail gun?" she yelled back at him. "Well, I can." Livia switched the radio off, slammed the stovetop, and stormed outside. She dreaded asking if the racket he mentioned was the radio or her humming. The nerve of the man, he was in her house. She picked up a pot of mums and dumped it into a ceramic urn. With some foliage and a few more pots of flowers, she'd have a pleasant fall arrangement to stand outside her back door. After a while, Nick strode out. "Do you need anything?" Livia asked, head down, intent on planting Flora. "Just taking a breather. Have you got anything cold to drink?" "There's lots of water in the tap." Nick turned toward the door. "There's also a pitcher of lemonade or juice in the fridge," she said. "Even better. Which would you prefer?" "Whatever doesn't have tons of sugar." Livia threw her gardening gloves on the patio, headed for the house, and returned with 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to Nick, where he lounged in a lawn chair, scrutinizing her herb garden. "Are you interested in herbs?" She sat down beside him. "Only in my food. You must have a green thumb." He nodded toward her garden. "I love to cook and prefer fresh to dried herbs." Nick smirked. "Love to cook, eh?" Livia glared at him. "Forget it." Nick chuckled. They ceased conversation at the sound of a vehicle pulling in behind Nick's truck. "I wonder who that is." Livia stood. Kathy sauntered into the backyard. "I was in the area and stopped by to see how your repairs are coming along." She beamed at Livia and leaned around her to wave at Nick. Livia threw Kathy a suspicious eye, but Kathy sidestepped her. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Kathy asked, focusing on Nick. "I hadn't noticed. I'm busy." Nick slipped his lemonade. "You're just sitting here with Livia." "We're discussing something," he said. "Would you be able to undertake some work at my house soon? I'm bored with the colors in my family room, and I'm certain the walls need patching before repainting. Perhaps you could do that for me and make extra window boxes on the garage," she said, fussing with her blonde streaks. Before she uttered another word, Nick raised his hand to stop her chatter. Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm going on vacation as soon as I finish this job. Kathy pouted. It's just a minor job. I have plans, Nick said. Ladies. He rose and returned to the house. Kathy spun toward Livia. I hope you're aware how lucky you are to have him working here. As opposed to, Livia asked. What? Never mind. Would you like a glass of lemonade? No, I should be going. I guess Lenny's friend Hamilton can take the family room. She strutted away. Livia shook her head. Some visit, she muttered, and heard Nick's chuckle as he passed the open door. Livia wondered what happened at Kathy's house when Nick worked there. She surmised Kathy must have thrown herself at him. But it was beyond Livia's imagination. Was there something underneath his scruffy exterior? Whatever. She shrugged and returned to her potting. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the right way to do it, Margaret. I also want to give a shout out to Margaret as well for the numerous hours that she successfully formatted the Anthology 5 for everyone. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you. And thank you, Neil, for being my partner in that.
You're welcome.
Couldn't have done it without you.
All right, just to let everyone know, we are down to our 2 final authors for the launch today, which will be followed up by a short conclusion and thank you to all of those who attended.
I think Neil is going to be reading next.
That's right.
All right. Neil's stories of suspense, gothic, horror, and fantasy have been published in 3 of the Hamilton Mountain Writers Guild anthologies. 2 were contest winners. Neil, please tell us what you're currently working on before reading an excerpt from Dead Ringer, your story in Anthology 5.
Thank you, Margaret. I am going to set the fiction aside, and I'm making a commitment. I started a nonfiction text about 5 years ago, and I really do want to finish that. It's my goal to have that done in 2021. Probably it's going to roll into 2022, but I'm making a commitment to get my nonfiction work completed. The story I'm reading today takes place in the 1950s, and an unusual murder has occurred in the Bartonville Cemetery, which is near King Street and Rosedale. In the selection that I'm reading, we hear Detective Thomas interrogating a suspect named Brian Simpson. Let's get to the story about Johnny speaking with you the night before he was murdered, Detective Thomas said. Well, that night he came to section E9 where I was digging 4 holes for the day coming. It was our usual grub break around 12:30, and Johnny didn't look well in the light of his lantern he's carrying. His puffy eyes look like he's real worried, and he hadn't been sleeping much. He was sitting, slouched, quiet, not his usual cranky self. He told me about them bells he's been hearing. Johnny said them bells started ringing near a week ago. He was shaking scared. And I asked him, how come you never told me about them bells? And he said, you would have thought I'd gone mad, working in a graveyard at night hearing bells. Are you saying Johnny Weiserman heard church bells ringing during the night? No, not church bells. Those damn grave bells. Just listen. The first night he heard them bells, Johnny said he had just finished covering up 2 fresh gravers. He was sitting for a smoke, and he said, and one of those grave bells started clanging. You know what those bells are for, don't you, mister? I'm not familiar with bells in the graveyard, Mr. Simpson. How about you explain what you know, and I'll try not to interrupt. Well, those bells are for the rich folks, you see. They gets a long string tied to their hand when they're buried. The string is connected to a bell hung up next to their stone. And if the person was never dead and they start moving down there, holy good God forbid, the string pulls and the bell starts ringing. That lets the living know they's alive and these need to be dug up right quick. All my years of digging in the Ville, I ain't never heard none of those bells ringing. Johnny said the first time he heard them bells, he started digging like a crazy man. When he heard dirt, he said, was flying everywhere. When he heard the shovel hit the coffer, Johnny stomped hard, hoping he wasn't too late. Johnny said he listened, but he only heard his heart beating louder like a drum. Not wanting to wait, he pushed the dirt to one side and opened the lid. And Johnny said he was so mad. The stiff was just laying there like nothing had happened. Hands together, wrapped with beads, dead as dead could be. Johnny sounded shook up about the ringing. I told him it must have been a stray cat brushing its fat behind against the string. Or maybe the wind. When Johnny raised his head, the lantern light revealed his bloodshot eyes. Brian, there's more you got to hear.
So good.
Thanks for letting me read. And I am going to conclude the launch meeting today. We're going to hear from Grace Nikia. She's going to read her heart-stirring poem titled Struggles.
Okay, thank you. Now let me just get this going.
Struggles. Ignoring my swirling thoughts, I cast confusion aside. No use looking for answers I will never find. Walking through Hamilton streets, music blares in my ears, drowning unwanted thoughts, haunting me night and day. I hope to forget moments that touched my heart, an electrifying touch, a breathtaking kiss. Lying in bed at night, waiting for sleep that won't come, struggling not to fall in love, fear of agony it might bring. You desire my flesh, not my heart and soul. Can't love you this way, so I said goodbye. As my heart breaks, I hold back tears, refusing to feel the pain inside. Avoiding sights of you, pushing memories away. Heart steeped in anguish, I battle to keep storm at bay. With heart locked, I avoid the misery of love. I struggle not to feel or think, a fight with no end.
Thank you, Grace. Grace presented an emotional ending that many of us can relate to so well. She writes, with heart locked, I avoid the misery of love, a fight with no end. Thank you to all of the authors who participated today, making this launch a complete success. Thank you to Sarah Farr, who you can see on the screen. She is the creator and the producer of the launch. Sarah has done a brilliant job advertising and preparing for this event.
Thank you very much. They wouldn't
Yes.
have been possible without all of these wonderful stories. I think that it's such an amazing thing that you've all done. Really, really.
If the viewers are interested in finding out more about Hamilton Mountain Writers Guild, You can check out our website, hamiltonmountainwritersguild.com, or you can send me an email at neilchop or nchop15@gmail.com. That's nchop15@gmail.com. So this concludes our Anthology 5 launch for today. Well done, everyone, and keep writing.
Congratulations, everyone. Okay, stop live stream and stop record.